Welcome back to Kings of the North Landis. This is going to be great. This is a great week of football ahead. Doug Lesmerises, Bill Landis, to preview the best of Northern football on this show. What we are going to do, we're going to talk about our playoff picks right off the bat, what we think is going to happen in the playoff at the end of the season. Then we're going to run through some Northern news. Then we're going to preview 15 Northern games this week, about 5 minutes each, run through everything you need to know. And then we're going to dig in on the 10 most important players in the Ohio State-Michigan game at the end of this show, Bill. We're not doing the Frantic 14. We're not doing it because it's a different kind of week. But this is this is why we do this.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. This is because eventually we're going to dive into all the games like this on a weekly basis. We're a little limited in what we're doing now with just the one Monday show, but this is a taste of what's to come when we go in and give each of these games a nice breakdown.
So we are as we've been doing this for the past couple of weeks, we predict what we think the actual final 14 playoff bracket is going to be. As we sit here right now, there are 9 teams left that have a chance to make the 4-team playoff. The only 2 of them that play each other this week are Ohio State and Michigan. So let me see, Landis, if I mean, this is pretty basic, I think. Do we agree with this premise that there are 7 teams between now and the end of the year that we would characterize as they are in if they win out? Let me double check this with you. Okay. Ohio State and Michigan, both in the playoff if they win out.
Yes.
Georgia and Alabama, who are already locked into the SEC title game, both of them in if they win out.
Yes.
Florida State, which suffered a devastating injury to starting quarterback Jordan Travis, gets Florida this week, then the ACC title game against Louisville. They're undefeated in if they win out.
I think that is up for some debate.
Really? Okay.
Well, it depends on what the win out looks like, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Unprecedented to leave out an undefeated Power 5 champion. But okay, that'll be an interesting discussion. And then Oregon, Washington. Mm-hmm. Washington is undefeated. Oregon has the close loss to Washington. They are on track to meet in a rematch in the Pac-12 title game if they both win this weekend. Do you think both of them are in if they win out, or does Oregon not quite hit that threshold?
Yeah, or Oregon's probably not quite there. Washington's definitely there. Obviously, they'd be unbeaten, but I think Oregon is maybe not quite.
So that's 7 teams we mentioned, and then Texas, which has a chance to be a one-loss Big 12 champ if they win out. They would need some help. Mm-hmm. And then Louisville's still in this. Louisville has 1 loss and is on track to meet Florida State in the ACC championship game. They are, I think, 9th in the pecking order, but they are in it. If they are a one-loss ACC champ, they at least have a shot. Yes?
Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's go to your bracket then, because you're breaking my brain.
Okay. That's interesting.
What are your 4 teams? I'm fascinated by this. Are you just alive with the love of Northern football?
Yes, I am.
Thanks for being that way.
Yeah. So it's Georgia and Ohio State at the top, which has been consistent for me. I think Georgia is an unbeaten SEC champion, will be the 1 seed. Ohio State is the unbeaten Big Ten champion, will be the 2 seed. I have Oregon, which I've had consistently in my field, but at the 4 spot. Now I have them in a 3 spot as a 1-loss Pac-12 champion. And then I have Washington as a 1-loss team, with the 1 loss being to Oregon in the Pac-12 championship. And that is a belief that either Florida State loses because it doesn't have Jordan Travis, or I think there's a legitimate discussion to be had about if they'll make it even as an unbeaten champ without Jordan Travis. The committee takes those kind of injuries into consideration. And if they fart around in these 2 games and still find a way to win, I think the committee could be justified in not putting them in there if they are to use the excuse of Florida State is clearly not the version of Florida State that it's been all year. And there are other deserving candidates. It would be a pretty tough blow to Florida State. I think mostly that they're going to lose. I think they might lose to Florida this week without Jordan Travis. If the loss was
quarterback, is very experienced. He's been around a long time.
Yeah, Tate Rodemaker. Yeah.
Plus, you like guys named Tate.
I do like guys named Tate. I think I'm mostly of the belief that I think Florida State is going to go down this week in their game against Florida. And then, because if it's Louisville, then it gets a little messy. You're going to put Louisville in as a 1-loss ACC champ. It'd be hard to leave them out too over a non-conference, a one-loss non-conference champ. I do think I think a one-loss Washington with its only loss in the conference title game would be in over a one-loss Michigan that didn't play in his conference championship game. One-loss Texas could make it complicated too. I kind of think Texas might lose before we get to that point, so that'd be a moot conversation. So it's mostly about Florida State, and I think my belief that they're going to lose to Florida.
And certainly, I mean, they certainly also would have a chance if they get past Florida to lose to Louisville in the ACC title game. And then again, it's like, oh, Louisville beats Florida State, but it's a wounded Florida State. How great of a win is that for Louisville? Do you have to put in a one-loss ACC champ if it's Louisville? My bracket is pretty significant. Well, kind of significantly different than yours. I have Ohio State 1, Alabama 2, Washington 3, and Georgia 4. And this continues with my belief that Alabama will beat Georgia in the SEC title game, which certainly does make things messy. This is Ohio State beating Michigan on Saturday, being an undefeated Big Ten champ. I continue to have Washington beating Oregon in the Pac-12 title game. And so then this Landis for me, and then I also, I mean, I've loved Florida State. Florida State was my preseason national championship pick. But I think it will be a sport-destroying travesty if they would be a 13-0 Power 5 champ and not get in because their quarterback got hurt, and you're just like assuming like, well, we don't think as good as they are. It's kind of a little bit like Cardale Jones and Ohio State against Wisconsin in the Big Ten title game in 2014, except that Ohio State team had a loss and had to prove something to get in. Florida State, I think, deserves still some of the doubt. They still have Keon Coleman. They still have John Wilson. They still have Trey Penton. They still have Jared Verse. They're still a very good team. So my bracket is a Florida State loss. But my contention here, it's kind of like with you. We're now comparing. You and I are both putting in a one-loss non-champ. You put in Washington ahead of Michigan. I put in Georgia ahead of Michigan. I have thought, and from a Northern perspective, that the Big Ten had a decent chance of getting two teams in. We are now creating a scenario where they would be in the discussion and not get in. Do you think Michigan in either of these scenarios would have a decent argument against a one-loss Washington or a one-loss Georgia, or would it just be like, man, sorry, schedule?
Yeah, I think it's the schedule. I just don't think it's good enough. They're missing the non-conference piece. Like if there was something there that you could grab onto, I think they'd have a shot. But Georgia's schedule is better. Like Georgia and Michigan played like similar schedules up until this month, and then Georgia's was backloaded, and so was Michigan's, but not to the same extent. And then Michigan would have, the loss in the rivalry game in this scenario. So I don't think they'd pass the test against the Georgia or even Washington. Like I think Washington's schedule is much better than Michigan's as well. But I don't. There is now it's a low percentage, I guess, chance of it happening. But there's a chaos scenario, I think, where the Big Ten gets in a fairly strong position to get two teams, right?
I'm not even sure.
Oregon State plays a role in that.
So, and I don't want to go too far down the road here, but because again, we can what if ourselves into oblivion. But let's do this. If Washington beats Oregon in the Pac-12 title game, so Oregon has two losses, they're out.
They're out. Yeah.
Georgia beats Alabama in the SEC title game. Alabama has two losses, they're out.
Mm-hmm.
Florida State loses to Louisville or loses along the line somewhere. And now what you wind up with is Georgia undefeated, definitely in. The Ohio State-Michigan winner undefeated, definitely in. Washington undefeated, definitely in. Alabama and Oregon definitely out. And now you would be choosing as the fourth team between potentially the loser of Ohio State-Michigan with one loss, maybe Texas as a Big 12 champ with one loss, or an ACC champ maybe in Louisville has one loss. I do think the Big Ten has a shot there, right? I think Michigan has a shot there if that's what we get to, which again is certainly not impossible.
No, and I think you could see like Louisville plays Kentucky. That's not an easy game. And I don't who's Texas play this week?
Texas Tech,
and then the Big 12 championship. Like I can see Texas losing either of those games. Like you'd need a lot of dominoes to fall, but I don't think the dream is dead of two Big Ten teams. It's just you need more help than Ohio State ended up needing last year to do it.
So let me flip it though. For both of us, if Michigan beats Ohio State and we have the same scenario otherwise, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So it's Georgia versus Ohio State for the 4 spot for me, or Washington versus Ohio State for the 4 spot for you. Certainly, Ohio State's played a better schedule. Do we think Ohio State would have a chance to win those head-to-heads with non-champs Georgia and or Washington?
Yes, I think it would depend on what the loss to Michigan looks like.
Yep.
But yes, I think they'd have a much better chance in that conversation than I think Michigan would.
And I think it applies to both. I think, again, Georgia, I think, is a stronger – I think my scenario, Georgia's a stronger 4 seed than Washington is on resume, right? With what Georgia has done against Missouri and Tennessee as of late, right? And again, it would depend on what the game would look like against Alabama. It would depend what the game would look like between Ohio State and Michigan. But if Ohio State and Michigan look like 2 of the 4 best teams, it's a close game that comes down to a last-second field goal, and you think to yourself, man, I just think that loser deserves to be in. There's a path. There's a path. Yeah. There's a path for sure. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. So there's not a ton. Like the games this weekend involve, like with these playoff teams, again, there's 8 games. Georgia's favored by 23 against Georgia Tech. I don't know. I guess anything's possible. Florida State. Florida State's still favored by 6.5. If Jordan Travis is healthy, that's probably a 14-point line. Mm-hmm. Bama Auburn is a 14.5-point game, so nobody really thinks Auburn's going to give Alabama a game. Oregon State and Oregon on Friday night certainly could be interesting. Oregon State gave Washington all they could handle this past weekend, but that's a 14-point spread for Oregon at home. Washington State and Washington, it's at Washington at 16.5 that Washington's favored by. Texas Tech and Texas, that's a Friday game as well. Texas is favored by 13.5. And then Kentucky-Louisville is a 7-point spread at Louisville. So, it would have to be some upsets, right? There's only 2 games that are a touchdown or less involving any of these playoff teams. Ohio State, Michigan, we obviously know about. And then the title games and championship weekend, it'll be a lot different again, headlined by Georgia, Alabama. Okay. We got a handle. Like the North is right there. There's 9 teams left, and the 9 teams that are left, it's 1, 2 North, 2 South, 3 South, 3 North, 4 North. So there's 9 teams left. It's 4 Northern, 4 Southern, and Louisville as a border school for the 9 teams still in the playoff mix.
Yeah, let's get in the South to get 4 Northern teams in the playoff. How's that happen? I'm just kidding.
So, a gigantic recruiting scandal breaks like in the next 15 minutes, and everybody on Georgia, Alabama, Texas, and Florida State are ineligible.
There you go. That'll do it.
I don't know. Stranger things. If you don't think there's Connor Stallions roaming around the South, right? Possible.
Yeah.
When we come back, we got to do a little bit of news, a little bit of Northern news before we get into this giant look ahead. We'll do that next on Kings of the North. Doug Lesmerises and Bill Landis. We did a coach check last week where we were, running through some dudes. Dino Babers was one of them, and he has since been fired by Syracuse University. What did you think of that move?
It wasn't surprising. I've been wondering if they were actually going to do it because I think, one, there's the larger question of like, what do you think you can be? And then is Dino Babers the right guy to get you there if you're Syracuse? But Syracuse has also had some injuries this year that I think can explain some of the struggles they've had. But I also understand like back-to-back years now, good start, and then you just kind of crater when you get in the ACC play. You're fighting for your life to merely finish 500 and get to a bowl game. Like if you have higher aspirations than that, or you simply just don't accept prolonged losing streaks in the middle of your season, I think I understand why this happened.
1 winning season in 8 years, like had a great year in season 3, 10-3 in 2018, which I do think bought him a lot of capital up there. But otherwise, again, a 1-10 season in 2020 in the COVID year, you kind of give somebody a break for that, but kind of fallen off the cliff the last 2 seasons. Came from Bowling Green. I do think whenever like Syracuse is the kind of program to me that go find a good MAC coach is not a bad formula for that. And you think about some of these MAC coaches that have jumped, like PJ Fleck from the MAC to Minnesota, worked out pretty well. Matt Campbell from the MAC to Iowa State worked out pretty well. Lance Leipold from the MAC to Kansas has worked out great. Lance Leipold was at Buffalo. If Syracuse, like if Lance Leipold was still at Buffalo, I'd be like, I don't know, get him down the road, man. Like that would be a great hire.
Right.
We've also talked about some other possibilities. Tony White, who had been the defensive coordinator at Syracuse, is now the defensive coordinator at Nebraska. Would he go back? Sean Lewis, who has some Syracuse ties, the offensive coordinator at Colorado, who got demoted. Do you like best MAC coach available, or who do you have in mind here?
Yeah, that was the thing when the move was made, and like looking at some of the candidates, like nobody like really kind of wowed me. Tony White's interesting. Like they did have a good defense at Syracuse before he left, and Nebraska actually has a pretty good defense now too. He's a little bit of a younger guy. Sean Lewis would kind of just be like resetting what you've been doing under Dino, and like there's some familiarity there with the offense. Like Sean Lewis was Dino's OC at Syracuse before he went to Kent State, so that would almost feel like trying the same thing a different way. Like I don't know. I saw one list that had Kurt Cignetti, the James Madison coach, on there. That like
interesting.
I mean, he's built James Madison into a viable power FBS program kind of like overnight. I think that's interesting. I do think you need a program builder there. But best coach in the MAC is probably the right path for a place like Syracuse. So I don't know, like, is that Jason Candle? Is that like Chris Creighton at Eastern Michigan? I think has done a really good job there, like turning that program into one that can actually win football games, which is no small feat. Maybe those would be the best two out of that conference. So yeah, like I don't think there's interesting candidates there. Part of me wonders if it's a little bit of a lost cause in the sense of like, this is kind of what you are if you're Syracuse in the ACC. Like you need to find somebody who can get you to 6-6 into a bowl game most years.
Yeah. I continue to like Charles Huff at Marshall, who's only 40 years old, but has a really good resume. Been at Penn State, been at Mississippi State, been at Alabama. I think a guy like that could bring a little energy to the program. But I do think this is sometimes you fire somebody because you have somebody in mind. I just think they felt like bottom line they needed a change no matter what. When you have the last two seasons fall apart like that,
right? I mean, they could have. It's a pretty straight line to Sean Lewis. I think like they could have Sean Lewis in mind. And maybe that's part of the reason things went a little wonky at Colorado because Dion thought the same thing.
Yeah. All right. Another piece of news. Cam Rising, the Utah quarterback who's been injured the entire season, has announced that he will be back at Utah for a 7th year in 2024. Do you think Utah is going to go and be the best football program in the Big 12 as soon as they get there?
Yes.
So Cam Rising's a nice way to start that next year, huh?
Yeah, I think like the top programs in the Big 12 in the reconfigured Big 12 are like Utah and like Kansas State, funnily enough.
Oklahoma State.
Yeah. But no, I think Utah certainly in the conversation immediately, and to have a 7th year Cam Rising. Listen, like he's not like, is it Cam Rising an NFL quarterback? I don't know. He'll probably be on a roster because he's a tough dude and probably a good locker room guy. We're not talking about a guy who's going to like start games in the NFL. I don't think he's almost like a quintessential college quarterback and a gamer and the kind of guy that I think you want if you're trying to compete for titles in the new Big 12. So there's like a baseline of I don't know, just like solid play at Utah that you can expect every single year. But when you have a guy like Cam Rising as your quarterback, it elevates everything you do. So yeah, I think Utah shows up in the Big 12 next year as one of the conference favorites with him.
Old quarterbacks at tier 2 programs is like a formula in college football right now.
Yeah.
And by tier 2 programs, I kind of mean everybody that's not Georgia, Alabama, and maybe Ohio State, right? Maybe Michigan. That beyond that, you think about Michael Penix at Washington and Bo Nix at Oregon and Sam Hartman at Notre Dame and Jordan Travis at Florida State. And it is such a formula. And I don't know everything about the Utah roster off the top of my head, but you start with this and you understand that Kyle Whittingham's teams are always going to play defense and they're always going to have tight ends. And I don't know, we might be in a 12-team playoff with Cam Rising. I think we might be a year from now talking about Utah in a 12-team playoff mix when they have a dude like that back.
Yeah, I think so too. You're right. We need to do a little more digging on exactly what that roster is going to look like next year. But again, I think you can safely expect them to be competent on both sides of the ball, and then Cam Rising elevate the offensive side of it. And the older quarterback is a good recipe for success, but a lot of teams have to go into the portal to find that. Utah is going to have a guy that's been in this program for almost a decade by the time next season kicks off, which I think makes that a heightened version of that.
All right, last thing here. The Apple Cup has been renewed. Not the Red Delicious Apple Cup, because you can't find Red Delicious apples anymore, but a great variety of apples. And thank you to Washington and Washington State for figuring this out.
Yeah.
We understand that college football is changing, but that should mean that you hold on to your rivalries even more. And there is no excuse for anybody that has a great rivalry that maybe now you aren't going to be in the same conference anymore, there's no excuse. That applies to Bedlam, Oklahoma State, and Oklahoma. It applies to Oregon and Oregon State. It applies to Washington and Washington State, because all these schools have figured it out. Georgia's playing Georgia Tech this week. They're not in the same conference. They play each other the last game of the year. Florida's playing Florida State. They're not in the same conference. They play each other the last game of the year. Louisville and Kentucky aren't in the same conference. They're playing each other the last game of the year. You can run through a million examples. So congrats to Washington and Washington State for getting this done. And it's cool. It's a 5-year agreement. They're going to play next year in Seattle, and then 2 and 2. 2 at Washington, 2 at Washington State. I love it. And there's no excuse for anybody to not be able to do exactly what these two programs did.
They're going to play next year at the Seahawks Stadium for the first one. Oh, that's cool. Yeah, no, this is great. I was, that's the thing you get fearful of. Like, on one level, you have to accept, I think, the changes that are happening with college football, but you want to be able to hold on to stuff like this and find a way to make, like, if the Apple Cup went away, that would suck. If any of the rivalries you mentioned went away as a byproduct of conference realignment and the shifting grounds of college football, that would be really, really crappy. So I'm happy that these two sides found a way to do that. I was honestly fearful that they wouldn't, or that there'd be too much animosity between a Washington State team that feels like it was kind of left hanging there with no conference, and a Washington program that jumped to a bigger, more lucrative ship in the Big Ten. So I'm glad they were able to reconcile whatever those differences were. Maybe it helps Washington State that it got all the Pac-12's money. It felt more inclined to do this now with Washington. But yeah, I'm glad we got this done.
But by the way, animosity is not a reason to not play a rivalry game. It's an extra reason to play a rivalry game. You abandon us. We hate you. We're going to beat you on the field. It's wonderful. There is no excuse, none, for any of this. And listen, they're going to play this game in the middle of September. So this has traditionally been, as it is this season, the last game of the year. But they're figuring it out to keep it alive somehow. But I do think, again, all these non-conference games that are game 12, throw Clemson, South Carolina in there too. I think the Big Ten and some of these other conferences need to work on this. And I understand maybe right off the bat they're not there. But for instance, next year in 2024, USC and UCLA are playing non-conference games on the last weekend of the year, because USC has something on the books. They play Notre Dame at the end of the year sometimes. So next year, when all the other Big Ten teams are playing game 12 in conference, USC's playing Notre Dame and UCLA's playing Fresno State, because they had to go find somebody. USC and UCLA are going to play their rivalry game the second to last weekend of the year, right? So the Big Ten wants Washington, Oregon, which clearly is a rivalry, to be a great new rivalry. Not a new rivalry, but continue that. But there's no reason that they can't play that the second to last weekend of the year and then play Oregon, Oregon State, and Washington, Washington State on this last weekend, right? So again, I understand that didn't get worked out on the initial push of a Big Ten schedule, but that should be the goal for down the line, for 5 years from now, to get back to that, because we have too many examples of how easy that is to work that out. And I actually, especially in a world, there's actually a benefit to it, because in a world where you're in a divisionless conference, and for whatever reason, like maybe you don't want to risk back-to-back games. Hey, we're playing Oregon, Washington, but we're the two best teams. They play in the Big Ten championship game the next week. If you play a non-conference game, you eliminate the chance of those teams playing each other back-to-back weeks, which, for example, has existed and always will exist now in the new Big Ten for Ohio State, Michigan.
Yep.
So you have to accept that. But when you have natural non-conference rivalries now, play those in game 12.
You're not everybody, right? Just for when it makes sense. You're not
for the ones that really, really matter.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I can get on board with that. I think that makes sense. Yeah.
If your most natural rivalry is in your conference, then you got to play on the last weekend of the year. Fine.
Mm-hmm.
Purdue and Indiana are playing the last weekend of the year. But if now your most natural rival, because of realignment, is no longer in your conference, still play at the last weekend of the year, because there's actual benefit to it. And there's no excuse. If there are Northern programs that do not find a way to play their primary rival because of realignment, we're going after them.
Yes.
You owe the fans that.
Yeah.
An obligation. It is not a if we can figure it out. It is an obligation to your fans to play your primary rival. Figure it out. Washington and Washington State did. Tip of the cap.
And I guess while we're having this conversation, we probably should mention John Canzano, the great sports columnist.
Well, I was going to mention that in Oregon State when we get to it.
Okay. All right. So
we'll tease.
We'll stick a pin in it.
Because yeah, Oregon State, you're on the clock.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. We got to start looking ahead. We got 15 games to preview snippety snap. And then we're going to dive in on a 16th game. Ohio State, Michigan. We'll start all that next on Kings of the North. Time now for what we're doing for most of this show, a look ahead. So listen. This is like the whole thing of this show. You have a Northern team that you love. You love Iowa State football. You love West Virginia football. You love Minnesota football. You love Utah football, right? But then we're trying to bring other programs like yours into your world. And we don't care about Tennessee or Arizona State or whatever. Like, they can do their own thing. We don't care about them. So it's good to educate, to know a little bit about these rivalries, because these other rivalries are kind of like your rivalry.
Yeah.
So that's why we want to do this. So I do, like, there's just 5 minutes a game. So I think you care enough. If you're here, I think you care enough to be like, oh, maybe you learned something, because you're kind of really focused on Wisconsin football. But it's like, well, I didn't know that about Kansas State, Iowa State. That's what we're here for, because we want all of us thinking us, Landis, us. Anybody here is an us. And then the South could do their thing. We don't care. But the us, I think we should care about each other, right? Don't we care? We do care. We care about each other.
We do care. I care. I care about you. I care about our listeners. I care about Iowa-Nebraska.
You care about Iowa-Nebraska, which is where we're going to start. This is a Friday game. So again, we're going to do about 5 minutes on all these games. Friday, Black Friday. Do you shop on Black Friday or no?
No, not really.
Everybody does it online.
Yeah.
Noon Friday on CBS, Iowa at Nebraska. This is the heroes game. They give a trophy. It recognizes the heroes in the communities of these two programs. Again, they kind of obviously started this when Nebraska joined the Big Ten. It's really good. It's very cool. Iowa leads the series 30-20-3. Iowa has won 4 of the last 5. But Iowa's in. Iowa's 9-2 and already in the Big Ten championship game. But Nebraska is a fighting, Landis, 5-6, fighting for bowl eligibility. Nebraska has not been to a bowl game since 2016. How much do you think the motivation factor is different for these games, for these two teams in this game?
Yeah, I think it's drastically different. I think Iowa, you want to finish it right. You want to get to 10 wins. But I also that whether or not the public at large thinks Iowa has any shot at winning the Big Ten championship, Iowa wants to make sure that it is positioned to do so. I think by protecting some people, maybe I don't know, maybe not. I think the motivation is much stronger on the Nebraska side to get to a bowl game in Matt Rule's first season. We've talked a lot about what Matt Rule's first seasons have looked like at his other places. They've been way worse than this, and I think everyone was gearing up for a pretty lean year in Lincoln, and here they are on the precipice of bowl eligibility in the biggest game of the year. And I think Matt Rule is an excellent coach who's going to push all the right buttons to get his team to really kind of harness that kind of feeling. So I'm expecting Nebraska's best game here, like the best effort we've seen from Nebraska. Whatever they can muster, given some of their injuries, I think we're going to see it.
Iowa is mad, though, because a year ago, Iowa had a chance to make the Big Ten title game, and Nebraska upset Iowa in this game to put Purdue in the Big Ten title game. That was under interim coach Mickey Joseph a year ago, because Scott Frost was fired so early last year. So, right? I mean, Iowa wants to get him back. This would be a huge thing for Matt Rule, to win your rivalry game and make a bowl in year one. There's so much on the line. It's about to pick 'em. The line has moved a little bit. It's around a toss-up game. There are so many toss-up games this week, by the way. There are, of the games we're doing, 9 of the 16 are within a touchdown spread, which is pretty good. There's a lot of close games, especially in the Big Ten. But, by the way, Iowa is on track potentially. So they have 9 wins. If they win this game and then win either the Big Ten championship, I don't know how that would happen, but then win its bowl game, Iowa could get to 11 wins. They've only won 11 games 3 times under Kirk Ferentz in 25 years. This could be one of Kirk Ferentz's greatest seasons. So there is a lot on the line for them. 123rd in offense, 3rd in defense. It remains an amazing Iowa season, but Who do you actually have winning this, Landis?
I'm going to go with Nebraska. I think. Now they let me down. I put my flag in the ground a couple weeks ago and I said I thought Nebraska was going to find a way to win the West, and credit to Iowa for doing so. If it weren't for the nepotism, this would actually be a really nice story that Iowa was able to overcome their offensive ineptitude to be in the position they are. But it's not because of nepotism. Nebraska's defense is good. Like statistically, they're very good. If you look at the matchup here of what both these defenses have done, they're fairly similar. And Nebraska, I think, in some ways, has actually been a little more functional on offense than Iowa has. They're at least a more kind of efficient rushing team. They do have some stuff going on at quarterback. Nebraska does. Chuba Purdy played last week. Heinrich Harburg, who took over for was it Jeff Sims, right?
Yep.
The Georgia Tech transfer, who was just not very good when they brought him in. Harburg was good, more of a runner than he is a thrower. Chuba Purdy is more of a thrower than he is a runner. I don't know that we're going to see Harburg in this game or not. But I think Nebraska might have an opportunity to run it well enough, and both these defenses are excellent for Nebraska to win a really low-scoring game.
These teams first played in 1891. It was the first game that Iowa's football program ever played out of state. They played in Omaha in 1891. I love stuff like that when it comes to these rivalry games.
Yeah.
By the way, Iowa this year, this sounds like from 1891. Iowa has 6 Big Ten wins. They've won by 10, 6, 9, 3, 22, and 2. So how could you pick Iowa to lose a close game? But I'll pick Nebraska too, and then we can come back and talk about how we picked against Iowa all year, and they are 10-2 and going to the Big Ten title game and feel silly. All right, next up is Miami at Boston College. I do remember the Doug Flutie game, 1984, beating Miami on the pass to Jared Phelan. Like, I can remember that would have been 11-year-old Doug lying on his living room floor, screaming at the little black and white TV because Doug Flutie completed that pass.
I was negative 4 years old.
You were negative 4 years old? Mm-hmm. We'll go back and watch it. When we do the offseason greatest games in Northern football history, we'll find that one for you. Okay. You heard of Doug Flutie, right?
Yeah, I know Flutie. Flutie Flakes, yeah.
Enjoy his cereal. What else did he do? Enjoy the man's cereal. Did he do anything else? Friday at noon on ABC, Miami leads this series 24-6, but Boston College has won 3 of the last 4. They last played in 2018. And by the way, this is a Black Friday game. The Flutie game was also a Black Friday game. Boston College is getting 9 points in this one. They're both 6-5, Landis, which is like, I know you've sort of, we've talked about the idea of, all right, Boston College is 6-5, might not be great. It's 6-5. Mm-hmm. Miami has the game where they forgot to kneel and they blew that game. Miami's lost 3 straight. Like, this is a good 6-5 for BC and a very disappointing 6-5 for Miami in year 2, right?
Yeah, it is, and which I think again raises the motivation question here. Like, what is Miami playing for? Does Miami even care about this game? I think the answer is probably no. They lost some tough games this year. The season's kind of gotten away from it. I don't know exactly what the expectations were in Coral Gables, but certainly it was not a 7-5 or 6-6 finish. I think they thought they could be more competitive than they've been in the ACC. So I think it is a spot for Boston College to take advantage of a Miami team that could be sleepwalking a little bit. I don't know that Thomas Castellanos has a Doug Flutie moment in him.
Come on, that's your guy. Don't give up on your guy.
Well, can Thomas Castellanos' moment be like a 60-yard run instead of a 60-yard pass to win the game?
Yeah,
because I don't know if the pass is happening with my man. He's an electric runner of the football. Boston College's rushing attack is actually pretty good. And their offensive line when it comes to running the ball is not terrible. And they are getting a little healthier at running back. They lost Virginia Tech a couple weeks ago. They were missing, I think they were down to like their 4th running back in that game. They got Kai Robichaux back this past week against Pitt, still lost, which is a bad loss for Boston College. But I do think you're going to see basically a full complement of what they're able to do running the ball in this game, and they're going to run it a lot. Problem is, the one thing Miami does really well is stop the run. And that defensive line is pretty good. It's probably the best run defense in the ACC. It's one of the better run defenses in the country. And Boston College just can't throw. So I think even with the advantage in terms of motivation and like juice coming into this game, I think the football of it might not favor Boston College, like really at all.
So you're picking Miami?
I am going to pick Miami in a bit of a snoozer. Yeah.
I didn't create this show to pick Miami to beat Northern teams, so I'll take BC. Miami can cram it. They forgot to kneel. What are they doing?
I don't think they're good. Listen, this would be like, I've poo-pooed the Jeff Hafley resume a little bit here the last couple of weeks, but I'm going to do it again right now. The combined record of the 5 FBS teams that Boston College has beaten when they played them was 10-19. On the season, those 5 teams are 21-34. This is a chance for Jeff Hafley to beat a team that has some talent and a little bit of a pulse. So let's see it.
They did beat Georgia Tech, right? That was a decent win, and they beat Army, and then Army went and beat Air Force. So I mean, like they have a couple okay wins. This would be a huge win for BC, no doubt about it. This would be a huge win for BC. I'll take them. All right, game 3. This is a little bit off the grid. These are not technically teams that we count among our 28 Northern teams on this show because they're not Power 5 teams. But this really matters. This really matters. This is to like the winner is probably in the Mountain West title game. It's Air Force at Boise State, Friday, 4 p.m. on FS1. Air Force is 8-3. Boise State is 6-5. They're both 5-2 in the Mountain West. Boise State has won 5 of the last 6 in this rivalry. They lead at 7-4 overall. And Air Force, unfortunately, is falling apart because everybody's hurt. Mm-hmm. So Air Force started 8-0, has lost 3 straight. Zach Larry, their quarterback, got hurt, then tried to come back, then got hurt again. Their leading rusher's been hurt. Their leading receiver's been hurt. And they just are not the team they were at the beginning of the year when people are talking about them maybe making a New Year's Six bowl. I think those injuries are a big chunk of why Boise is favored by about 6 in this game. UNLV beat Air Force last week. So right now in the Mountain West, UNLV has 1 loss. UNLV is playing San Jose State, who has 2 losses, and Boise and Air Force both have 2 losses. So if San Jose beats UNLV, the tiebreaker in the Mountain West in like a multi-team tie is the old BCS computer rankings.
It's crazy. I couldn't believe that when I saw it.
They're like calling up a guy. It's like, is this Steve? Yeah, this is Steve. Are you still doing your BCS computer rankings? No, I stopped them. Why? Because we're a conference and we still want them.
Fire them back up. We need them.
It's unbelievable. But I mean, again, with the scenarios, the loser of this game is out. Mm-hmm. And if it's likely that UNLV beats San Jose State, then it's going to be UNLV versus the winner of this game for the Mountain West title. I feel so bad for Air Force. Zach Larrier, who's again has Ohio roots, was one of the great stories of the start of the season, and they just aren't who they were anymore. So how do you see this one shaking out, Landis?
Yeah, I think it's a tough spot for Air Force given the way that the back end of the season has gone for them. I just don't know, what I don't think any service academy team is built to endure the injuries that Air Force has built. There's just not a lot of depth on those rosters. So when you start plucking guys out of the lineup, especially the quarterback, it gets pretty dicey. They've turned the ball over a lot. I think they have 11 turnovers in their last 3 games. Just 1 in the last one, but 10 in the 2 games before that. So they've been a little loose with the football, which you cannot do. It's a shame that it's happened this way because there was, 4 weeks ago, Air Force was looking like it was primed to get that New Year's Six spot for the group of 5. And now it's kind of fallen off here and probably not even going to play in the Mountain West Championship game, unfortunately. I like Boise here, but Boise it's weird. They've won 5 of their last 6 and they fired their head coach.
That's true.
I don't really know. I don't really know what's going on there. They fired him after they won by 40 and let him go. And I understand they have higher expectations than merely scraping by to get into the Mountain West Championship. They want to be competing for that G5 New Year's Six spot every year. And I think they're built to do it. But it's a weird spot there. So they're doing this with an interim coach. And I think they're going to win this game and probably, go to the Mountain West title game.
No offense. I also am going to pick Boise. I'm going to root for Air Force.
Yeah.
Nothing against Boise.
I'm with you there. Boise's a lovely town, though.
It is. Yeah. Have you've been there or no? Or you in your mind it's a lovely town?
No, I have been there. I went there to cover the NCAA tournament 5 years ago.
Live show, Kings of the North live show from Boise at some point. We'll make that a bucket list item. Next up is Penn State at Michigan State. This is another Friday game at 7:30 on NBC. It is at Ford Field in Detroit. They moved this to a pseudo-neutral site instead of East Lansing as a Michigan State home game. 18-1 I love when the rivalry series are tied. And this is kind of a fake rivalry, but I like it's an okay one. because who else is Penn State's rival supposed to be? And Michigan State's rival is Michigan, but Michigan's going to play Ohio. Like, I like this game on the last weekend of the regular season. I'm cool with this. Maybe the most surprising stat in this game is that James Franklin, we know he has a losing record against Ohio State and Michigan. He also has a losing record against Michigan State. James Franklin, 4-5 against the Spartans, Landis.
I did not know that. I was pulling together some notes for this game, and that kind of blew my mind. I was like, I saw it on Wikipedia. I was like, I got to double check this.
Yeah,
and
a lot of counting.
I went through like 4 different sources to make sure that this was correct. Astonishing. Now, when Franklin first got to Penn State was in a rough spot, and Michigan State was still pretty good under D'Antonio. They had not quite fallen apart yet, so I guess that makes sense. But even still, to see James Franklin under 500 against Michigan State is a bit jarring. Playing for the Land Grant Trophy, a monstrosity of a trophy that is about 6 feet tall, and I don't know what it weighs, but it takes multiple people to carry it for the winning team. They should probably burn it and then bury the ashes somewhere, but. They're still playing for it.
Burn trophies.
Yeah. Just get a new one. Yeah. This one looks like a 2-year-old designed it.
Yeah. 20-point spread. Penn State favored. Listen, if Penn State wins, Penn State's probably on track for a New Year's Six bowl. Like, again, for a year where they fired the offensive coordinator, they couldn't move the ball at all against Ohio State or Michigan. For the second straight year, they'd be looking at a 10-2 season where they lost to the 2 big boys in the Big Ten and then won everything else, which isn't nothing. I don't know. Like, I don't think that Michigan State can pull this off. Harlan Barnett has done the best he can. They're 4-7, 2-6 in the Big Ten. And it's hard. Like, Penn State last week, they fired Mike Yurcich, and then the first game with the new offensive coordinators, Drew Aller is 6 of 13 for 79 yards, and they wind up using Bo Pribula, who's their number 2 quarterback, to run the ball a ton. So I don't know where Penn State is, but I do think wherever they are, they're still good enough to beat Michigan State in this one.
Yeah, I think before I get into that quickly, I do want to make a note of what James Franklin is looking at here, because for as much conversation as we had about, like, is he getting the job done to the extent he needs to, he is looking for a double-digit wins for the 5th time in his 10-year tenure. And I went back and looked at this because I was just curious. Since Penn State joined the Big Ten in 1993, so we're talking 31 seasons of Penn State football, there have been 12 double-digit win seasons, and James Franklin has 5 of them, or will have 5 of them if they win this game. So it's not like I don't think it's something that should be taken for granted at Penn State, I guess is what I'm saying. So it is a nice feather in the cap for James Franklin, even he's not getting the job done entirely. Drew Aller got hurt against Rutgers. He scrambled, got hit on his throwing shoulder, played the next play, totally airmailed a pass. They took him out of the game. He did not come back in. After he left, they ran 17 straight times with Bo Pribula at quarterback. Bo Pribula ended up throwing 1 pass in that game. James Franklin afterwards would not say what's up with Drew Aller, only saying he doesn't see it as being a long-term thing or being significant. But I guess there's at least a possibility that Drew Aller is not available for this game. I don't know that makes a tremendous difference. I actually think it doesn't make Penn State's offense better if Drew Aller doesn't start, but it makes it quite different because I think you're going to see a lot of running the football if Drew Aller is not available. And I just don't think whatever Penn State throws out there, I don't think Michigan State is equipped at this moment to stop it. Michigan State beat Indiana on a late touchdown this past weekend. They had 45 scholarship players available for that game due to injuries, and then they lost a few more. So they're really, really banged up. And they're going to be playing in a juiceless Ford Field that I think will probably have more Penn State fans in it than Michigan State fans. So it's a really tough spot for Michigan State. But I guess one thing to watch is the Drew Aller situation and if Penn State decides to play him in this game.
So we'll both take Penn State, but maybe we wouldn't give the 20 with Penn State. Do we agree on that?
Yeah, I think that's probably right. I think, again, another low-scoring game where Penn State does most of the scoring, but 20 feels like a little bit of a big number for an offense that is very much in flux.
And you make a very good point. Again, for all the things that Penn State is not, the chance to get to another 10-win regular season is not nothing. That's 10 happy Saturdays for the Nittany Lions if they get there. All right, last Friday game. This is gigantic. Oregon State at Oregon. Oregon is 10-1, 7-1 in the Pac-12. That single loss to Washington. Poor Oregon State, 8-3, 5-3 in the Pac-12. They have lost by 3 points to Washington State, 3 points to Arizona, and 2 points to Washington last week. It is a great season for them. You do not take 8-win seasons for granted at Oregon State, but man, what could have been but they still have a chance to do something huge in this rivalry. 67, 49, and 10 all time. Oregon leads this. It is the second most played rivalry in the North. They've played 126 times. They first played it in 1894. And so let's talk about, before we get to the football, they have not figured this out yet. So this is not on the books for 2024 yet, but it's got to be, right? They got to get there.
Yeah, they do, and I think they will. And I think actually the Apple Cup getting put back on the schedule will be the kick that these programs need to realize they need to do it. I don't think there's the 4 preeminent programs in the Pacific Northwest. 2 of them figured it out. You can't be the 2 that didn't figure it out. So I think they'll get it done.
126 times. And again, John Canzano, who really knows what's going on in the Pacific Northwest in terms of college football there, he has reporting that says they're looking at September 14th, which I think is that's when the Apple Cup's going to be. Oregon State currently has an open date. Then Oregon has a game scheduled against Boise State. And I think it's a 3-game series they have scheduled with Boise State. I think they're trying to cancel 2 of those games to maybe wedge in Oregon State for the next 2 years there as you get it all sorted out. They played 126 times, man. This is a must. And I know there's been discussions, there's been other reporting of Oregon State people admitting, hard feelings are going to factor into this. You can't let administrative, athletic director, presidents, board of trustees anger over you left our conference, you left us high and dry, we're losing this money, we're suing each other in court. Who cares? Play. My guess is you are right. The Apple Cup has showed the way and they will figure this out. Your guess is they do figure it out?
Yeah, I think they will. I'll be surprised if they're not playing next year.
But in the meantime, on Friday night, they're going to play this game not knowing, unless they announce it before kickoff, which would be awesome. But if they play not knowing, that adds a little juice to this, right? That would be hey, what are we doing here? Oregon had dominated this series. Between 2008 and 2019, Oregon won 11 of 12. But now Oregon State has won 2 of the last 3, including last year, when Ben Gulberson at quarterback for Oregon State threw for 60 yards and they won. Bo Nix for Oregon threw for more than 320 in a losing effort. Oregon State scored 21 points in the 4th quarter last year to erase a 34-17 deficit. So Oregon is a national title contender right now. If they lose to Oregon State, they're not anymore. And also, they're super mad because they blew it a year ago against Oregon State. There is a lot of juice to this one, no?
There's a ton of juice to this one, yeah. I think you're going to get a really motivated Oregon State team that probably feels like it should have beaten Washington. They had some tough breaks in that game. Had the punt go over snap go over their punter's head for a safety. Had an incredible momentum play where Washington's Dylan Johnson was running in for a touchdown and fumbled the football. Oregon State gets it back and then fumbles it right back to Washington in the red zone, and Washington scores a touchdown. Oregon State didn't play perfectly against Washington, but I think they played well enough with some tough breaks to potentially win that game, and they're probably pretty ticked off because of that. And I could see them bringing that to this game against Oregon and trying to take out some of that frustration on them. Really physical game, I think we're going to see here. Maybe Oregon's played Utah, but Utah's had enough injuries throughout the year that I think this will be the most physical game that Oregon will see this year, and I think it'll be a good test for them. A team that I think fancies itself pretty physical along both lines, to see what they can do here against an Oregon State team that's not going to back down from them. Yeah, I think this has a chance to be pretty feisty, and I think close too. For as well as Oregon has played, I think this is close.
Oregon's favored by about 2 touchdowns, but I think it's close too. But Oregon has been rolling. Right? Since the 3-point loss to Washington, Oregon has beaten Washington State, Utah, Cal, USC, and Arizona State by an average score of 44-18. Bo Nix right now is the 2nd Heisman favorite behind Jaden Daniels of LSU. I hate to tell everybody in the South, he's not going to win. You can't win the Heisman if you don't play on conference championship game weekend, and LSU's not going to win. So don't throw your money away betting on Jaden Daniels right now, because those odds are going to shift dramatically. Mm-hmm. I don't know why people are thinking that way. Bo Nix is absolutely in the mix for the Heisman. Oregon is absolutely in the mix for the national title. Troy Franklin at receiver for Oregon, more than 1,200 receiving yards. Bucky Irving at running back for Oregon, more than 1,300 yards from scrimmage. Oregon has been playing great, dude, right? Like, as you continue to put Oregon in the playoff, do you think Oregon is a team that legitimately could win the national title?
I do, yeah, because I think they're good enough on defense. Like they have a championship defense, not the highest level, but good enough. Balanced on offense, can run it if they need to, can throw it if they need to. I know they don't throw the ball down the field a ton, but I do think they can dial that up when they need to with Bo Nix, and like Troy Franklin had a huge game last week. I think he set a record maybe for receiving yards in a game, I believe is what it was for Oregon. He had that wasn't what it was, but he had 128 yards and 2 touchdowns against Arizona State. Like there's enough there to be explosive, I think, in any way they need to be. Offensive line is very good. So I think they have the pieces, to be like not just like, oh, it's fun. Oregon's like kind of making its way back. Like, no, I think they are for real national title contender.
Oregon State limited possessions against Washington, as I thought they would. Both those teams, they each only had 4 possessions in the second half. They made it a low-scoring game. I think that's the plan for Oregon State here. And I don't think it is incongruous to say Oregon is a national title contender and Oregon also might lose to Oregon State on Friday night. Like I do think Oregon State has more than a puncher's shot. I would definitely take Oregon State plus the 14.5.
Mm-hmm.
But I think Oregon State has like a 40% chance to win.
I think so too. Like I wouldn't let the 3 losses fool you. The Washington State loss for Oregon State was weird, but aside from that, like I think they've played really well in every game they've been in. And I think Oregon State on the right day can beat just about anybody. Like I think they have the pieces to do that. The one thing I've thought this earlier too. I can't remember what game it was. What was Oregon State's other loss besides Washington State and Washington?
Arizona. I think Arizona.
Arizona,
right?
yeah,
by 3 to Arizona.
I feel like in those games, I've found myself wondering why DJ Uiagalelei hasn't run the ball more. And he had 6 carries against Washington. And it seems like they go to it, like when they're down, they go to it late and then it's effective. And you think to yourself, like, we should have been doing this earlier, because I think it's a path to victory for you if you want to use him that way. So I'm on alert for that in this game to see if DJU runs the ball a little more against Oregon than he has previously. Because if you pair him with Damian Martinez in that offensive line, that's a pretty devastating rushing attack.
The heck with it. I'm taking Oregon State. I can't help it. I'm
Okay.
getting, like, I have not been putting Oregon in the playoff. I've been putting Washington in the playoff. And so I've just liked Oregon State all year, and I think they can limit possessions. Oregon State's going to be mad about last year, maybe too mad. I don't know. I think they're both good. They're both really good. Congrats to the Pac-12, man. Going out on a high. Just some good football. But you'll take Oregon.
I'm taking Oregon in a sweat. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Quick break. That was a lot, but this is a great weekend. When we come back, we'll start digging into the Saturday games next on Kings of the North. Continuing our look ahead on Saturday games now, we'll start with the Old Oaken Bucket. It's old and it's Oaken. Indiana at Purdue, Saturday noon on the Big Ten Network. Purdue favored by 2.5. Both teams 3-8. Not great. Indiana 1-7 in the Big Ten. Purdue 2-6 in the Big Ten. They've been playing this thing since 1891. Purdue has won 4 of the last 5. Purdue is 76, 42, and 6 overall. This is, I think, interesting because it is the first Old Oaken Bucket for Ryan Walters, the new Purdue coach, and it might be the last Old Oaken Bucket for Tom Allen. And that brings some juice to it because I think Tom Allen has some very good attributes as a football coach. I don't know that he is actually Big Ten head coach material. So how do you think this is going to play out, and how much are you factoring Tom Allen's future into the result of this game?
Yeah, we're going to get a rally for Tom Allen here from Indiana. Yeah. It's possible. You made a good point last week about, like, Indiana keeps losing, but they're losing close, and maybe that is a sign that these guys are still bought in to what Tom Allen is doing. They lost by a field goal to Michigan State. They got kind of a brutal intentional grounding penalty at the end of that game that made them kick a 49-yard field goal to try to tie it. That wasn't even close to making it. It would have been more manageable if not for that penalty against Brendan Sorsby, their quarterback. So, like, I think it's on the table here. Like, Tom Allen was bad against Jeff Brom in this game. He's 1-4 in the bucket game. I don't know. I guess the thing I don't have a good enough appreciation for is like how important this game is. Like, if we think Tom Allen's coaching for his job, like, can he save it by beating Purdue?
I think he can. And I'm not going to pretend we're inside that decision. But to me, a 4-8 Indiana season where they fought down the stretch and they won the bucket, I think, and again, with the buyout that you have to pay, I think you can stomach that. You would take a little bit of momentum into the offseason. Like you fought in November and you beat your rival versus I think if they're not competitive in this game, if they get the bucket stuck on their head and get thrown down a well, that makes it more difficult. I do think there's a momentum that comes from like your last game of the season. It defines you in a lot of ways. It's the last thing that people have in their head, including donors and boosters and members of the board of trustees. So I don't know. I think I might be if they're at least competitive in the bucket, maybe he sticks. And if they get their doors blown off, this might be it.
That's kind of where I am, but the buyout just makes it so tough. I just don't know if Indiana's the kind of program that's going to pay $20 million for a coach to walk. It's a hard thing to envision a program like Indiana doing. I agree with you that I think we have enough evidence now that Tom Allen is probably just not a Big Ten level head coach. Maybe he's a lower level head coach. I think maybe he's best suited to be a Power 5 coordinator like he was before he got this job, calling a defense for a good team. I do think he can do that. So I don't know. I think I think Indiana probably has the motivational factor behind it here with all that you're talking about. Because I do think there is something to the idea of these guys still playing hard for Tom Allen and wanting to get him a win here. And I think this game means something to both sides. Purdue's got some injury stuff going on. Hudson Card didn't play last week against Northwestern. Purdue probably still feels like it should have won that game. I think they went for it twice on 4th down in Northwestern territory, didn't get it, missed a field goal, ended up losing by 1 score, and like had a chance driving at the end to still try to win it. So they played okay despite not having their starting quarterback. If they don't have Hudson Card in this game and Ryan Walters kind of wouldn't say what the deal was there, then I think Indiana has a shot. If Hudson Card plays and otherwise Indiana is closer to 100%, I don't know that Indiana has enough to beat them.
So your Monday pick is?
I'm going to go Purdue.
All right, I'm going to go Purdue as well. But I would expect I'll expect Indiana to fight. So then that's some credit to Tom Allen that I do think his team does that. Mm-hmm. All right, next up, let's go to Colorado at Utah. They call it the Rocky Mountain Rumble. Is that right? No, the Rumble in the Rockies. The Rumble in the Rockies. I like that name, the Rumble in the Rockies. 3 p.m. Pac-12 Network. Before that network and conference ceases to exist, Colorado 4-7, 1-7 in the Pac-12. Utah 7-4, 4-4. Really close series. Utah leads it 34, 32, and 3. Utah has won 10 of the last 11, including 6 straight. How you seeing this one, Landis?
Yeah, I mean, I think Utah's really banged up, and this is still a 3-touchdown spread. So yeah. I think that tells you all you need to know. Utah, unfortunately, lost Jonah Ellis at standout defensive end, a guy we've been very high on all year. He's out for the rest of the year. Karini Reed didn't play. Their linebacker didn't play last week against Arizona. Kyle Whittingham said he could be back for a bowl game, but probably not for this game. Cole Bishop, their starting safety, also did not play last week in their loss. They got their butts kicked by Arizona, but Bishop could be back this week against Colorado, so maybe they'll get a little of a boost for that. Utah's reeling, like they've lost 3 or 4. They're not scoring a lot on offense, but Colorado's pretty bad, and this could be what an ailing Utah team needs, I think, to finish its regular season on a high note. Shadur Sanders got hurt against Washington State on Friday night. Don't know if he's going to play in this game. And if he doesn't play, I don't know what the heck Colorado's going to do because there's not much else going on there. So even with the injuries that Utah is facing, I think Utah probably still wins this one comfortably.
Both these teams headed to the Big 12 together next year. We do have to remember, so Colorado started 3-0, 1-7 since then. But among their losses, by 7 to USC, by 3 to Stanford, by 7 to Oregon State, by 3 to Arizona, they have competed, right, with no offensive line, with the injuries that they've sustained. Again, if there's no Shadur Sanders, I don't know how they can do it. But I will still expect Colorado to compete here. 21.5 feels like a lot to me with as banged up as Utah is. But I think we both have to wind up taking Utah. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. And I wonder, too, if this gets factored in against Washington State on Friday night. Colorado fumbled twice and got his return for touchdowns, and I think there was a special teams touchdown there, too. So Utah doesn't only have to score with its offense to cover this number.
This is not protected in the new Big 12. Again, they've played this, like 70 times. It's not one of the all-time traditional rivalries. In the new Big 12, they only protected 4 rivalries, and they're all in-state. And so one of them that did get protected is BYU-Utah, the Holy War, which has not been played for the past couple of years. And so this is nice. This is a nice rivalry game at the end of the year for Utah, but Utah-BYU is what it's all about. That will come back with both those programs in the same conference next year, which is a good thing. But we just Utah-Colorado are not going to play each other every year in the new Big 12 schedule. So, we're not going to be seeing this every year. So, enjoy the Buffs and the Utes while you can.
Yeah, this will be a really fun one when they get to the Big 12 and Colorado's roster is better than it is now.
Yeah. All right. So we're both taking Utah in this one. Next one up is Northwestern at Illinois. Illinois has won the last 2 after Northwestern had won 6 in a row previous to that. Again, this is a really close series. 116 meetings. The first one in 1892. Illinois leads it 57, 54, and 5. So, after 116 games, that's pretty tight. The Land of Lincoln Trophy is what they play for now. This is at Illinois. Illinois is favored by 5.5. Northwestern 6-5, 4-4 in the Big Ten. Illinois is 5-6, 3-5 in the Big Ten. I do think motivationally, right? Illinois needs this for bowl eligibility. Northwestern locked it up with the win over Purdue last week. But I also think it's Isaiah Williams. We love him. He is an unbelievable player for Illinois. I think he has a chance to be first team all Big Ten. But I think Northwestern actually might be better than Illinois, like a better football team. Ben Bryant, since he came back, had been injured at quarterback for them, has played well. I'm a little surprised. I know it's at Illinois. I'm a little surprised that this line is 5.5. Illinois is coming off a really tough 15-13 loss to Iowa last week where they competed the whole game. How do you see this one shaking out?
Yeah, I think I'm probably with you that Northwestern is better. They're at least playing better and have played at their best more consistently, certainly, than Illinois has. In a weird way, I think this could be kind of high scoring. Both of these passing offenses have shown a not a consistent form, but a ceiling where they can really throw it around a little bit. Like Northwestern has a 400-yard game under its belt. There's a couple of games where they got close to 300. Illinois certainly can do that with John Paddock, a quarterback, and Isaiah Williams, who you mentioned. So it's weird. I don't know that you think of a Big Ten West game turning into something like that, but I do think this could be a little bit of a shootout, not dissimilar from what the Illinois-Indiana game was a couple weeks ago. I kind of lean Illinois here. I agree with you that the spread feels too big based off how these two teams have played. I get the home team being the favorite, but why we're tacking on an additional couple points over the 3 that you normally get for just being the home team is kind of weird to me. But I think the motivational factor of getting to bowl eligibility, their ability to throw the ball, gives Illinois a little bit of an edge. And I do think Northwestern has kind of accomplished what it never envisioned happening this year. So I could see them maybe resting on those laurels just a little bit.
Certainly overachieved, but Northwestern has won 3 of its last 4, and the loss was a 3-point loss to Iowa. So they've had a really good month. I will take Northwestern here. I think they're playing better. I think that's the right way to say it. I actually think probably top to bottom, this is a pretty even matchup, but Northwestern, I think Illinois has certainly been more inconsistent this year. I think Illinois might have a higher ceiling, but I think they've also had some games where they've made mistakes. So I think it's close. You think it's close?
I think it's close. I think it's close and high scoring. Yeah.
Maybe in the 30s?
Yeah.
Right? You're looking 35-31 kind of thing?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. You take Illinois, I'll take Northwestern, and we will move on to our next game, which is Wisconsin at Minnesota. This is the most played Northern rivalry. They've played it 132 times. Started in 1890 for Paul Bunyan's Axe, baby. Wisconsin is 6-5, 4-4 in the Big Ten. Minnesota 5-6, 3-5 in the Big Ten. This series also tied. How great is that? Since 1890, it's 62, 62, and 8. Wisconsin won 14 straight from 2004 to 2017 to take the lead in this series. Think about that. It's like you're down. It's like, we got to get. They do it. Then Minnesota tied it back in 2018. Then Wisconsin won in 2019 and 2020. And then Minnesota won in 2021 and 22 to tie it again. The Axe, baby. You're loving the Axe, Landis.
I love the Axe. It's one of the best trophies in all of college football because it's also a weapon. Like you can use it to defend yourself if need be.
Yeah, it's better. Like, which trophy would do the most harm? Like if you were going into battle and you had to take a college football trophy, this has to win, right? Unless you want to, like, I don't know, hit somebody in the head with a turtle or something. I don't know what the other
this whack 'em with the yellow buck. Yeah, no, this is the one. Does anybody play for sword?
Bowls. I don't know what know what we should do. Here, let's put this out here right now. If you currently are a Northern rivalry that does not have a name, we are here to name your game for you. You may play for the KOTN sword. We will sponsor it, like whatever it takes. We'll come do a live show at the game. If you are lacking that, and there are a few that are, play for the sword. We're here for you.
Yeah. What kind of is it? Like a claymore, like a big one, like a two-hander? Two-hander? Yeah.
Yeah. Now I'm just imagining the winner of the Purdue-Indiana game standing with a bucket on its head, and then our guys just whacking him in the head with the sword. Whack. Again, awesome that it's 62, 62, and 8. PJ Fleck, 7th year for PJ Fleck. He's made bowls in 4 of the first 6 years. He didn't make it in year 1. He didn't make it in the COVID year. They're not bowl eligible right now. So like they need to like win this game to get there. I think that's pretty motivational, man.
Yeah, I think so. 2 pretty similar teams. I think Wisconsin's probably a little more banged up. They did get Braylon Allen back last week, and he ended up scoring the game-winning touchdown against Nebraska in overtime. So it's something to consider. I wasn't so sure he'd come back at all, and I guess they weren't going to play him last week, and he like begged to get into the game, and then he won them the game. So they have that. Minnesota's pretty banged up at running back. I think lost another one against Ohio State over the weekend, so they're down to probably like their 4th or 5th option at that position. But they're a tough team. They're going to play hard. Both these teams are going to play hard. I think it's possible that Minnesota's defense maybe is a little better. I don't know. I think I would probably side with the motivational factor here with Minnesota and getting the bowl eligibility. I think it was a pretty big exhale from Wisconsin getting there last week with their win. And Minnesota will be motivated to do the same this week.
Minnesota getting 1.5 at home in this one. Again, it's another one of these games. It's about a toss-up this week. Minnesota's lost 3 straight. They blew the game against Illinois and lost 27-26, and they got blown out by Purdue and Ohio State the last 2 weeks. They also had that game against Northwestern earlier in the year that they blew. You know, they had to play Drake May in North Carolina. They had to play Michigan. They had to play Ohio State. So like it's been a tough schedule for them. I think it's also been like I think they thought they'd be better. I think it's been kind of like a weird year. They probably should be better than 5-6 right now. But again, this has been a consistently winning program under PJ Fleck. And if they miss a bowl, I think that would be a pretty disappointing year. While Luke Fickell in year 1 at Wisconsin, it's been a little sideways. They've had, again, the Wisconsin writers that I read, their loss at home against Northwestern a couple weeks ago, people were calling that like the worst loss they'd seen from a Wisconsin team in years. So, there are bumps in year 1. I think maybe there have been more bumps than people expected.
Yep.
For Luke Fickell at Wisconsin in year 1. So I do think that there is absolute reason for both of these programs to want to go out on a high note, right? Because again, there's stuff you want to take into the offseason, and there's going to be no more Big Ten West, but these are teams that are going to want to try to compete in the top half of the new Big Ten starting next year. I think these teams should be 2 of the top 9 in the 18-team Big Ten, right?
Yeah, I think so. And I think if you're Wisconsin, there is motivation of wanting to finish with a true winning record, like not merely be 500, right? To salvage that in a year where things did get a little sideways on them. So I don't want to say that they don't have any motivation here. It's just that they kind of got what they needed last week by at least guaranteeing themselves a bowl game. And I think the motivation for Minnesota to do the same is a little stronger.
So we're both taking Minnesota?
I'll take Minnesota. Yeah.
All right. We'll both take Minnesota here. Next game. Maybe this is a candidate for the KOTN sword game.
I like that.
Maryland at Rutgers. Maryland leads this series 6-3 since they both joined the Big Ten. Overall, Maryland leads it 11-7. They first played in 1920. They've talked about naming this game. They've talked about creating a trophy or a rivalry for this. They've never done it. NJ.com suggested they play for a railroad tie. Because they're both like
the Amtrak Bowl.
Yeah. And you can paint the railroad tie like half and half of the colors of each program. I like that. I also like the sword. So we're willing. I mean, because they're the Scarlet Knights. You could stab a turtle. We'll take a sword and we'll stab it through a turtle. And that's the trophy. Oh, it's got to be the Knights. We've got to give them the sword. Do you have Greg Schiano's number?
I do, actually, yeah.
Okay. Tell him we have a rivalry trophy for him. I think this should be a rivalry.
Yeah,
I think it makes total sense, doesn't it?
I agree. Yeah, they're both like kind of in that I-95 corridor there in the Mid-Atlantic. Not regional powers, but they exist in the same region. Probably recruit a lot of the same players. I would think there's probably decent overlap there. And I think Rutgers. Like, I guess it's an interesting conversation. Like, what do you think Maryland should be? But what Maryland is at the moment is a team that's like usually going to a bowl game. And I think Rutgers would love to be that.
Yeah. Really interesting. Both this is a great game. I don't know what to tell you, man. This is a great game. It's like another toss-up game. They're both 6-5. They're both 3-5 in the Big Ten. Rutgers certainly has a defense first reputation and perception, and Maryland is offense first. Rutgers is getting to it home, but again, I just think of it as a toss-up. Who's the better program right now? Like, who would you rather be? Right? I would say since they've come into the Big Ten, certainly Maryland has been a more consistent winner. But who would you rather be right now?
I think I'd rather be Rutgers right now because you can still sell optimism there. Maryland seems a little stuck in mediocrity. And Rutgers would love to be stuck in mediocrity.
Yeah, Maryland got to where Rutgers wants to be, but then Maryland has not ascended beyond that.
Yeah,
where Rutgers is still on the path. This is big for that. I think for Rutgers to beat Maryland in this one would really say something about Rutgers. Like a 7-5 season for Rutgers would be awesome. They're already both bowl eligible, which is great for both of them. I think this game really matters on Saturday.
Yeah, I think it does too. I think it matters for Rutgers to finish with a 7-5 record, which would be their best regular season finish since 2014. And Maryland probably has higher aspirations than being 7-5, but I also think this season really got away from them after they lost to Ohio State. And Mike Lossley just got a contract extension, so I don't think he's going anywhere. But you don't want to lose what I think would be 6 of his last 7 games, including the regular season finale to Rutgers. You don't want that on your resume as you're trying to sell people hope and optimism for the Maryland program, and you just got paid a couple extra $1 million to do that. So it's a pretty big spot for both teams.
So who you taking?
My question, so Rutgers has played Ohio State, Penn State, and Iowa in a row. That's a pretty, Ohio State, Iowa, Penn State in a row. Pretty tough stretch of football there in the Big Ten. I'm sure they're pretty beat up. Maryland just played Michigan really tough, and they're probably a little beat up too. And then the last time they played a Big Ten power, they did not really bounce back all that well from it when they lost to Ohio State. So I think there's a little bit of that at play too, just kind of the air coming out of the balloon after a good showing against a Big Ten power. I think I'll go Rutgers here, but the one thing, Rutgers can't throw, they can really only run the ball. Maryland's run defense is actually not terrible. Maryland held Michigan to 3.3 yards per carry last week. And they did a pretty good job of stopping Ohio State's rushing attack earlier this year. So that could be a strength on strength that might favor Maryland a little bit and certainly Maryland's more functional throwing it than Rutgers is. But I'll take the good vibes with the Rutgers program over the stagnant vibes of the Maryland program.
I'll take Talia Tagovailoa in a game like this. Again, the whole thing with Talia is he's a good quarterback, and then sometimes in the biggest games is he there. But I think he'll be there on Saturday for this one. Gavin Wimsatt, the Rutgers quarterback, his best football still ahead of him. So I think it'll be a good one. Worth watching, for real. Like, we're not like blowing smoke here. I think this could be a good football game, but I'll take Maryland.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a good game too. And one other note I'll add to it. Kyle Monangai, the running back for Rutgers, is 19 yards away from becoming Rutgers' first 1,000-yard rusher since 2012.
Nice. We'll get there.
Yeah.
A lot to celebrate. Playing for the sword. All right, another quick break. When we come back, 5 more Northern games to preview. We'll do it next after this. Next up is a game that does matter in the playoff picture because Washington's playing. It's the Apple Cup. We talked about it earlier. They did renew it. Washington State at Washington, 4 p.m. Saturday on Fox. Washington favored by 16.5. They've played this 114 times. Washington leads the series 75-33-6. Pretty lopsided. Washington has won 8 of the last 9. How do you see this working out, Landis?
I think it works out as a comfortable win for Washington, but there is, I think, a decent percentage chance of this becoming a shootout. No, like with the way both these teams can throw the ball. Now, Washington, I think, has got it back a little bit after messing around some. I know they didn't put up a big number against Oregon State, but that was played in pretty terrible conditions. I thought Michael Penix looked like a Heisman Trophy candidate in that game, was throwing it really well. His legs were a difference maker in that game, too. He had a rushing touchdown. And we've seen the ceiling of Washington State's passing attack. They kind of got back to it against Colorado. I don't really know what that means, but we also saw them like put it on Oregon State early in the year. So if they could somehow muster that again, then I do think you could see some fireworks here. But part of me thinks that now that Washington has sort of gotten on the other side of a November gauntlet where I thought they might drop a game. I think some people around the country thought they could drop a game. They didn't do it. Some of the games were close, but they won the games they needed to win to get to this point, 11-0, and maybe there's some relief that comes with that gets Washington back to looking like the dominant team it was at the beginning of the year. So I'm more inclined to think that happens than I am like Washington State plays its A game and goes blow for blow with Washington throwing the ball.
Yeah, I mean, there is something being lost here that these two programs aren't going to be in the same conference anymore. So, there is something to say goodbye to here. But at least they're going to play and the sport changes and that's the way it goes. So I just don't think it's close. It's just Washington State has not been the team that it's been. So we're both taking Washington in this one.
Yep.
All right, let's move on. Next game up is Notre Dame at Stanford. And frankly, I'm not even sure why we're doing it exactly. Notre Dame is 8-3 at Stanford. That is 3-8. Stanford did win last year. Notre Dame is, 8-3 and like they're okay. And this is like kind of a rivalry. They play either when they play at Notre Dame in even years, it's early in the year. When they play at Stanford in odd years, it's at the end of the season. They do have this scheduled for 2024 still, but Stanford's going to the ACC. And I don't know what the future of this rivalry is, but I think everybody will be okay, right?
Yeah. Well, Notre Dame's like half a foot in the ACC too, so now they're like conference members. Yeah.
So Notre Dame has losses to Ohio State by an inch, Louisville and Clemson. They have beaten Duke and USC. This kind of crazily is going to be the last football game ever on the Pac-12 network. It's Notre Dame at Stanford. It's like, what gets more? Too few, like a 3/4 ACC school and a team that's about to be in the ACC. They're wrapping up the Pac-12 network, 7 p.m. on Saturday. Notre Dame's favored by 25, man. I guess a 9-3 season would be good for Notre Dame, but it also feels like there's some opportunities lost here. Again, we talked about when they lost to Clemson. Man, that was a tough one. They almost beat Ohio State. Kind of a weird year for Notre Dame.
Yeah, I thought there was an opportunity for them, as I said, I think prior to the Clemson game, to kind of turn it up and finish the season on a strong note and maybe contend for a New Year's Six bowl. They've obviously lost that opportunity, but they can still win it or finish with 9 wins, get a pretty good bowl game. I don't think that gives Marcus Freeman a ton of momentum going into the offseason. It's still probably a letdown no matter what happens here. But there's an opportunity for Notre Dame, I think, to just like steamroll this Stanford team and I don't know, run for 300 yards if it wants to. So that could be fun. That could be a nice way to kind of go into the postseason just by completely demolishing a team with your rushing attack.
Yeah, no, I think that happened. So we're both taking Notre Dame pretty comfortably.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right, we'll take Notre Dame. Moving on then, West Virginia at Baylor. West Virginia leads this series 7-4. And I kind of wish West Virginia and Cincinnati were playing this weekend. They played last weekend. And again, we talked about the protected Big 12 rivalries. They did not protect West Virginia, Cincinnati going forward. It's two northern teams at the two northernmost teams of the new Big 12. Like I think that would have been cool. Instead, you wind up with West Virginia, Baylor this week and Kansas, Cincinnati this week. So, not like a lot of rivalry to this when they didn't play before West Virginia joined the Big 12. But West Virginia has a lot to play for, man. West Virginia's 7-4, 5-3 in the Big 12. Baylor's had a terrible season. They're 3-8. But West Virginia's only favored by about a touchdown in this one. I don't know, man. Like West Virginia's having a pretty good year, as it turns out.
Yeah, they are. They're in an interesting spot. Like, do we know, is CJ Donaldson going to play against Baylor?
I'm not sure.
Yeah. So that could be interesting. But no, it's been a good bounce back or not even bounce back, but just like maybe a little bit of a step forward, even for West Virginia, especially if they can get to 8-4. Like 8-4 is, I think, about where you want to be most years if you're West Virginia. Maybe 8-4 is kind of the base level of acceptable for a program that's won a lot of football games and expects to get to a bowl game, and probably will expect to be more competitive in the new Big 12 than it has been in this iteration of the Big 12. But yeah, it's been a good year for them, and I think they're positioned well to finish it on a high note here. Baylor's just not very good.
This is Saturday, 7 p.m. on FS1. West Virginia, after a 2-game losing streak in the middle of the year, was 4-3, and they've won 3 of the last 4. They beat UCF. They had a close loss, they lost to, it's not close. They lost to Oklahoma in there, but they're finishing on a strong note. I think it's been a weird year. We've talked about West Virginia a lot. It's been a weird year for them, but 8-4 with the chance to win a bowl game to get to 9-4, that would be their best record since 2011.
Yeah.
So that's not nothing, right? So for Neil Brown, a guy who felt like he was on the hot seat coming into the year, a chance to finish strong for West Virginia. It starts here with Baylor. We both picking West Virginia?
Yeah, I think it's another situation not dissimilar from what Notre Dame will do to Stanford. I think West Virginia is going to run all over Baylor.
Okay. Next game, we mentioned it previously, is Kansas at Cincinnati. Kansas is 7-4, 4-4 in the Big 12. Cincinnati is 3-8, 1-7 in the Big 12. They played twice. So Cincinnati is new to the Big 12 this year. They split games in 1995 and 1997. This has been a weird year, not a weird year. It's been a bad year for Cincinnati. They started 2-0. They've lost 7 of their last 8. They're 1-7 and in last place in the Big 12. And they certainly at times, Landis, have just looked like they're not ready to compete in this conference right now.
No, and I think they'll be okay in the new version. I don't know. I didn't like the hire of Satterfield there when they made it. So I'm still of the belief that that's not really the right guy to shepherd Cincinnati into this new era in the Big 12. So maybe they'll have to take some lumps before they realize that. But I think just sort of as a program where they're positioned ability to recruit, long term, I still think there's reason to be optimistic about what they could be in the Big 12. I think it just might take them a while to get there, and we've seen this year that they're not quite where they need to be, and I don't think they're where they need to be to win this game either.
Saturday, 7:30 on ESPN2. The last 5 years at Cincinnati before this year, they were 53-11. Luke Fickell was 4-8 in year 1 at Cincinnati and then went 53-11. And so to fall off into this is tough. If Cincinnati loses this game and finishes at 3-9, it'll be their worst season since they won 3 games in 1999. So this is quite a drop off, but it's also, Luke Fickell was doing it in the American. Now it's like, hey, the coach who built Cincinnati up to sort of, I think, help create the opportunity for Cincinnati to join a Power 5 league, he leaves right as they're going in. I think it's an understandable big step down for Cincinnati, but it's also a giant step down. They've got to get this figured out, but I don't think this is the determining factor. Kansas is only favored by 6. I think this could get ugly.
I think Kansas is favored by 6 because it's on its third quarterback. But even then, again, we're like 3 straight games here where I think like Kansas just needs to run the ball and then they'll destroy Cincinnati. Like Cincinnati gave up 424 rushing yards to West Virginia last week. That West Virginia is probably a little bit better, or at least right now, a little bit better of a rushing team than Kansas is, but Kansas can still put it on you that way. And I just don't think Cincinnati has the pieces to keep it. I'm actually surprised it's still at 6, even with the injuries in Kansas' quarterback position.
All right. We'll both take Kansas in this one, and that will lead us to our final game of this segment, which is Farmageddon. Iowa State at Kansas State, 8 p.m. on Fox. Iowa State leads the all-time series 52-50-4. Again, 106 times, and it's that close. They first played in 1917, and there is a little bit of like controversy around this one because this is one of the rivalries that was not protected by the Big 12, and like people are kind of upset about that, aren't they?
Yeah, I think they should be. Two like-minded programs here. Like I think little like mirror images almost of each other with the way they want to go about their business. So I think they should be playing every year.
Kansas State won 10 straight between 2008 and 2017, but Iowa State is 3-2 in the last 5. I think this like really matters. This is just like a good football game between two good but not great teams. I don't know. I'm a little surprised the line's 11.5. Iowa State, kind of hung around with Texas last week. Iowa State 6-5, 5-3 in the Big 12. Kansas State is 8-3, 6-2 in the Big 12. What are you thinking about on the field for this one, Bill?
Yeah, I wonder if this spread. So Iowa State had a hard time in the trenches against Texas. And Kansas State is not as good as Texas, but it's still pretty good up front, especially on the offensive line. So that's probably part of why this spread is what it is. I thought Iowa State did a good job of hanging in against Texas, but just kind of gave up a couple of big plays. Iowa State could not run the ball on Texas. They finished with 9 rushing yards in that game. They averaged less than half a yard per carry. Just couldn't handle what Texas had up front on its defensive line. And Kansas State is a pretty good tackle for loss team. Like they'll get into your backfield and mess some stuff up. So there's probably enough there to just think that Iowa State can't quite get into a rhythm offensively. And even if its defense is good, Kansas State is probably good enough to win a lower scoring game by a comfortable enough margin here to cover this. So I don't know. I think Iowa State's got some fight to it. I actually like Rocco Becht, their quarterback. Like I think he's got some promise. Still a little raw, but I think you can see the long-term vision there of him being a good quarterback. Maybe he's not quite ready to help Iowa State win a game like this. And Kansas State is still technically alive too for the Big 12 title game. So they have some extra motivation on their side.
So you're taking K-State?
I'm going to take Kansas State. Yeah.
I would take Kansas State, but I actually think I would take Iowa State plus 11.5.
Yes. I think I'm with you there.
A closer game than that. Yeah. So, okay. That is it. Those are the 15 games that we wanted to preview to build up to Ohio State at Michigan. And we're going to preview that in our look ahead focus by diving in on the 10 most important players for that game. Take a breath. We'll do that next on Kings of the North. Time now to preview the best game of the weekend. Ohio State at Michigan, Saturday, noon, Fox. This line was about 5.5 coming into the past weekend. It got down as low as 3.5. I think it's settled around 4 at this point. 118 meetings in this rivalry so far. Michigan leads at 52-6. And Bill, we're going to go deeper on this because it deserves it. And you and I already did this. We went through, we each picked 5 players. It's not the best players in this game. It's the most important players, like the pivot points in this game. Mm-hmm. And we'll start off with the guy that you made the number 1 overall pick for this game. Who is it and why?
Yeah, it's Ohio State center Carson Hinsman. Redshirt freshman, first year starting, did not play at all last year. Didn't play a single snap this year, so he took his first college snap on the road against Indiana all the way back in September and has been the Ohio State starting center for every game this year. And he's young, right? He's young. He still needs to develop physically, improve his play strength. I think some of that stuff has shown up this year. And he played okay against Minnesota, to give him credit. But prior to that, I don't think he was playing particularly well to the point where I thought that had emerged as a pretty big vulnerability for Ohio State. And now they take that vulnerability on the road against what might be the best collection of defensive tackles in college football. Texas has a claim to that, I think. maybe some teams in the SEC. Michigan's defensive tackles are excellent. Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, Chris Jenkins, that trio there, but they go even deeper than that. They have four, I think, that are pretty good. And we've seen that group wreck games, and I think Carson Hinsman is first here because if he doesn't play his best game of the season, I think that there's an opportunity for Michigan to really wreck what Ohio State wants to do offensively with its defensive tackles.
Yeah, we're going to get to some other guys like Marvin Harrison Jr. later in this list, but if Ohio State doesn't have time to throw the ball, it isn't going to matter who they can throw it to. Talking about these Michigan defensive tackles, Mason Graham has played 271 snaps. Chris Jenkins has played 284. Cam Good has played 183, and Kenneth Grant has played 272. They are 4 of the 8 highest graded Michigan defensive players on PFF. Mason Graham leads the way at 86.6, but they're all almost at 80 with their PFF grade. Landis, they're just like, they rotate, they're disruptive. They certainly are going to be an issue in the run game for Ohio State, but they can blow up pockets. And it's just one of these situations. Ohio State thought Luke Whippler would be at starting center this year as a fourth-year college football player. He chose to go to the NFL draft, was picked by the Cleveland Browns, and they've been replacing 2 tackles and that center. And you and I were very intrigued by how it might go at tackle for Ohio State this season. They still have some issues there. But this is like kind of a program. Stuff happens. A guy goes early. It's maybe you don't have a million backup center. Like I think when they recruited Carson Hinsman, they knew he'd be a starting center at Ohio State eventually. I don't know that they ever thought he'd be the starting center in 2023.
Right.
And so it's not about like a second-year kid. It's like, hey, man, how come you can't handle these 4 awesome Michigan defensive tackles? But it's a situation that Ohio State's in, and it might get very real in this game.
Yeah, I think Carson Hinsman is doing this a year early. And I thought that was evident when the offseason started, and Ohio State didn't really do anything to address that. They got another center out of the transfer portal in Vic Cutler, who's not played, and I don't think is an Ohio State caliber player. And they had Matthew Jones on their roster, who was a starting guard, who was the top center in his recruiting class way back in 2018, but they've never really given him the shot at center other than 2 weeks ago at Michigan State. He played some snaps. Didn't play any snaps against Minnesota. I still think it's on the table for them to go to Matthew Jones at center if this gets out of hand for Carson Hinsman. But Ohio State kind of chose to go down this path, and I guess they're going to have to deal with whatever the results of that are. And I'm not trying to like make Carson Hinsman like the scapegoat here if Ohio State ends up losing this game, but I do think it's probably the most important stress point for Ohio State in this game. Like they got to be good on the interior of the offensive line to win this game. Would
you have made a change by now? Would you have gone to Matthew Jones and played somebody else at right guard?
I think that so Carson Hinsman allowed 7 pressures, I think it was, against Notre Dame to a couple of good defensive tackles, Howard Cross and Riley Mills there. I think coming out of that game, they could have done some shuffling on the offensive line, and they chose not to.
Okay. All right. So the guy I drafted first and is second on this list is the guy right behind Carson Hinsman. It's Kyle McCord, the Ohio State quarterback. It's not about Kyle McCord playing at a Heisman level. It's about Kyle McCord being confident, playing with anticipation, not throwing into double coverage. He was quite good against Michigan State 2 weeks ago. Bit of a slow start, bad field position, a lot of drives for Ohio State against Minnesota last week. Fine, had a couple throws that you held your breath a little bit on. Like, he doesn't have to be great, but and we've, Ohio State fans have seen Kyle McCord be great on the final drive against Notre Dame, for example. But here you are in the 12th game of the season, and there still feels like, as with a lot of first-year starting quarterbacks, he's capable of making a bad read or a bad decision at an inopportune time. And if that happens 2 or 3 times against Michigan, that's where I think he becomes such an important guy to this game. He doesn't have to be great, but he just can't make killer mistakes.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And I also think there's going to be maybe 2 or 3 opportunities in this game where he's going to have to create something, like extend a play, scramble for a few yards when something's not there. Like he doesn't need to be a running quarterback suddenly because he's not that. But he needs to use his feet as a weapon when the job requires him to do so. And he's not had to do that a ton this year. There have been promising instances of it. Had a scramble against Wisconsin right on the play that he kind of re-injured his ankle. I remember a scramble for, I think, a first down in the first game of the season against Indiana. I think he might have had one against Notre Dame. So he can do it, but I think the matchup in the trenches here with Michigan's defensive line and Ohio State's offensive line is such that Kyle McCord is going to have to be the most willing, I guess, to be a playmaker that he's been all year.
And that will be contrasted against J.J. McCarthy, who Ohio State in recruiting picked Kyle McCord over J.J. McCarthy, and J.J. McCarthy will do that with his legs. I mean, Michigan takes advantage of that with called runs sometimes, but certainly J.J. McCarthy is no stranger to running for a first down on 3rd and 8. So that will be a direct comparison with two really good defenses in this game. Can a quarterback make some out-of-pocket plays? And that'll be a test for Kyle McCord. All right, who did you pick 3rd? It's our first Michigan guy off the board.
I picked Carson Barnhart, their starting right tackle, like mostly as a stand-in for the Michigan tackles. That position's not as good, I think, as we expect Michigan to be. I think that's true of the offensive line for Michigan in general, maybe with the exception of Zach Zinter, who's very good at guard, and Drake Nugent, who's had a good year at center. The rest of that offensive line, I think, is probably a step down from what it's been the last 2 years for Michigan, and that's especially apparent at tackle. Carson Barnhart could not block Chop Robinson when Michigan played Penn State, to the point where Michigan just stopped throwing the ball. they just ran the ball for the rest of that game. And then last week against Maryland, Michigan played without its left tackle, Ladarius Henderson, then lost Miles Hinton, who was playing for Ladarius Henderson, ended up having to move Carson Barnhart to left tackle, put Trente Jones at right tackle. It's a little bit of a revolving door there of who's available and who's not. And even when they have been at full strength, I just don't know that it's been a particularly impressive position. And I think that there's an opportunity there for JT Tuimoloau, for Jack Sawyer, for maybe some blitzing guys from second levels to get a little bit of pressure on JJ McCarthy by exploiting what I think are some weaknesses at Michigan's tackle position.
It was a little shocking to watch Michigan against Penn State when they were having such trouble at right tackle, just be like, okay, we're not going to try that anymore. And against Penn State, that worked. They can't do that against Ohio State, right? They can't just decide we're not going to throw the ball anymore.
No, I don't think so, because I think part of the reason that worked, and we talked about it, I think on here maybe 2 weeks ago after that game happened, was what Penn State got caught a few times using what it calls its prowler package, I think, which is like putting all of its pass rushers on the field on 3rd down, and those guys do nothing but pin their ears back and run off the field and try to get the quarterback, and then Michigan just ran the ball. So I don't think Ohio State is going to make itself that vulnerable to that. Now, I could see the game progressing in a way where Michigan feels like its best chance is to like run the ball, play possession, limit Ohio State's opportunities on offense. But I would be surprised if Michigan is able to do that as effectively as it did against Penn State.
Carson Barnhart, according to PFF, has allowed 22 pressures this year. That's by far the most on the Michigan offensive line. So they figured it out. And again, this is one of those again where Jim Harbaugh being suspended for this game, Sharon Moore is the offensive coordinator, the offensive line coach. Now he also has to be the head coach. It's like if Jim Harbaugh was coaching against Penn State, maybe Sharon Moore could have dug in and like, we're going to solve this. But instead, he's trying to do 3 different things at once. And it's like, okay, we're just going to stop throwing. And credit to him, it helped them win the game. But if they have to problem solve on the offensive line against Ohio State, that I do think is a legitimately complicating coaching factor of the Harbaugh suspension.
Yeah, I think I actually had not considered that, but I think you're right. I think it showed up a little bit last week too, and there's some of their ineffectiveness running the ball against Maryland, and certainly trying to figure out a way to protect JJ. Who I want to make about JJ when it comes to protection too. Later on, we talk about him. But yeah, I actually like. No doubt about it, Michigan State had an advantage with its offensive line against Ohio State's defensive line the last 2 years. I think that has flipped this year.
Okay. All right. Let's move on then to the first Michigan guy I took at number 4. It's Colston Loveland, the Michigan tight end. He is, I don't know. Is it fair to say that outside of Brock Bowers at Georgia, that Cade Stover at Ohio State and Colston Loveland at Michigan are in the next group of the most dangerous tight ends in major college football?
Yeah, I think so. I think you could be talking. I think the three maybe you named are the Mackey finalists this year. I wouldn't be surprised if that happened. Yeah.
So Colston Loveland, 462 receiving yards this year, 32 catches on 43 targets. And I think, we saw Ohio State, Mitchell Evans from Notre Dame, who unfortunately got hurt in the midst of this year. He showed what kind of problem he could be when Ohio State played him earlier. I just think Colston Loveland is the most dangerous guy in the Michigan passing attack in this game. Roman Wilson certainly has been good for Michigan. He took a hit last week. We're not sure of his status. Cornelius Johnson, they have some other guys. But I think Loveland is the guy that, especially on third down and that kind of thing, is the guy that Ohio State has to stop.
Yeah, I think you're right. Very curious to see how Ohio State goes about doing that, because I don't think linebackers are the answer. Mitchell Evans got a lot by, I think, just finding the soft spots in zone coverage against Ohio State's linebackers. And if Ohio State does more of that against Michigan, I think you could be looking at a big day for Colston Loveland. Ohio State has not played a ton of great tight ends this year. Like Notre Dame was definitely the best they saw. Penn State has good tight ends, and they didn't do a whole lot against Ohio State, but I think that's more a function of Penn State not knowing what to do on offense than it is Ohio State necessarily figuring something out without a cover tight ends. So I agree with you. I think that there's stuff out on the outside with Roman Wilson and Cornelius Johnson for sure, assuming Roman Wilson can play in this game. But I think Ohio State's corners are up to that task, and I don't know if they have found the right answer yet to cover a dynamic tight end.
Loveland, one catch for 45 yards and a touchdown in the game last year. That play where a couple of Ohio State defenders got mixed up. Again, this is a guy they're not afraid to try to hit him down the field too. So now we get to like the obvious choice, and maybe he should have been number one. But I think what we're doing here, Bill, is like trying to find areas where there could be things that happen that prevent Marvin Harrison Jr. from being the most important person in this game, but you took him at 5.
Yeah, I mean, he is the best player in this game, but that's not exactly what we're doing here, because I think Marvin Harrison Jr.'s effectiveness, to your point, is based on, partly at least, on the success of other people. Like Marvin can't throw himself the ball. So, but if there's time for Kyle McCord to throw him the ball, then I think we could look up at 4:00 on Saturday and say, what was the difference? And the difference was Marv, because no one else in college football, like short of Washington, I think, has a player that can take over a game at the receiver position, quite like Marvin Harrison Jr. can. He had a big game against Michigan last year. Like Marvin Harrison and Emeka Egbuka both went over 100 yards receiving against Michigan last year, and Ohio State still lost that game. So, that also kind of factored into me not taking him quite as high on this list, maybe as people expected to. But he definitely has the ability to be the reason Ohio State wins. If there's time and space to get Marvin the ball, I don't know that there's anybody in the country that can cover him, not even Michigan's good defensive backs. So he deserved to be on the list for sure, even if he's on number one.
I think Ohio State's plan to win is let Marvin Harrison Jr. win them the game. But we took the center and the quarterback from Ohio State first, because if they don't do their jobs, Marvin Harrison Jr. won't have the opportunity to win Ohio State the game. But probably the best team that Ohio State played this year, the best defense certainly that Ohio State played this year against Penn State, Marvin Harrison Jr. won Ohio State the game because other things were good enough to create that opportunity. So he is the separator here. Michigan has some separators too. I do think there are some really big playmakers on both sides of the ball here. And I'll just tell the viewers and listeners now, we did not draft any running backs here, because I do think Trevion Henderson, Chip Traynham for Ohio State, Blake Corum, Donovan Edwards for Michigan, I expect all of them will be very good in this game. But I think they'll balance each other out to some degree. I think everybody has expectations of who they are and what they will do, and I think they will fulfill them. But we're looking for X factors here. We're looking for like, oh, this didn't go well, or this exceeded something. And so I do think the Ohio State run game has come far enough with Trevion Henderson the last month that it's comparable to the Michigan run game. And then what separates these teams offensively is the explosiveness at receiver as defined by Marvin Harrison Jr.
Yeah, I agree completely. You're looking for gaps between the two teams, and I think we've arrived at this point with the running back position being fairly even and the rushing attacks being fairly even. So that's it does feel weird to me not Trayvon Henderson has such explosive potential that it does feel a little weird to me to not have him on this list. But I think it makes sense for what we're trying to get across here that they wouldn't quite rise to that level because they kind of do cancel each other out.
All right, number 6, and I took Sonny Styles, the Ohio State safety. And when we talked about Colston Loveland, and you said, I'm not sure linebackers are the answer, is that because you think Sonny Styles is the guy who's going to be covering Colston Loveland a lot?
Yeah, I think so. That's what Ohio State has done with Sonny. They didn't do it against Notre Dame, which I guess is something to keep in the back of your mind. But that's kind of what they did last year when they had a tougher tight end matchup. They put Sonny out there and let him cover him, most notably Darnell Washington in the Peach Bowl. Colston Loveland is not Darnell Washington because there's only one Darnell Washington. But yeah, I think that's probably Ohio State's answer here is Sonny goes where Colston Loveland goes. At least that's what I would do. And I think that's what Jim Knowles is going to do.
And the issue with Sonny Styles here, who reclassified, should be a freshman in college, but he reclassified, was a freshman last year who, as Bill said, didn't play that much, did play in the Peach Bowl semifinal, has been a starter here in his second year at Ohio State all season. With the injury to Lathan Ransom, he has gone to playing more deep safety for Ohio State. Previously, he had been a slot in the box kind of safety, but he's going to play two positions in this game.
Yes.
When Michigan has 3 wide and then the Buckeyes put Jordan Hancock as a cornerback in the slot, Sonny Styles will be a deep safety. When they go to a heavier package and Sonny Styles comes down, they maybe take Jordan Hancock off the field or move some things around. Sonny Styles is going to be more in the box. So he's going to be playing 2 positions here with a lot of responsibilities. And Bill, this is a guy that Ohio State in the spring and the preseason was really talking about streamlining him. We want him to be able to focus on stuff. And now through the course of a season with his growth, his immense talent, and also the injuries and necessity, now they're asking him to do a ton.
Yeah.
Asking him to do a ton. And in the run game, in the pass game, like I think you could almost make a case. There are playmakers on both sides defensively. I think we could have taken Sonny Styles 1 on this list and made a case for it because all the things he's going to be asked to do.
Well, it's interesting when we're talking about 2 of the best defenses in the country here, and we've got to pick 6 to pick our first defensive player, and it is Sonny Styles. So I think that tells you about his importance to Ohio State's defense and his importance in this game. You're right. He is asked to do a lot. I was nervous in the offseason when they were saying they were going to streamline the role for Sonny because like that in my head, I was like, that's not enough. Don't streamline Sonny. Keep him out there all the time. And they have more or less gotten to that point. They were taking him off the field a little bit in the first half of the season. Now some injuries, I think, have kind of negated that, and Sonny is out there all the time, basically playing 2 different positions. I am curious about his coverage ability, and I don't think it's bad. I just don't know that we've seen it tested a ton this year, and teams have gotten him with smaller, speedier guys, right? Not tight end types, but like slot receivers, or like Maryland has Corey Dyches, who's a tight end, who's like basically a receiver. He's like 200 pounds. Guys like that, I think, have beaten Sonny a time or 2 in coverage. So this will be a different test for him to run and cover someone like Colston Loveland, but I think he's up to the task.
So then you took the first Michigan defensive player. Now it's kind of mad because I wanted to take him too. Why'd you take him?
Similar idea. I think Mike Sainristil does a lot for Michigan's defense. He'll play in the slot. He'll play down on the line. Like I remember last year, he had it was him, right? He had a great play in the end zone, like tipping the touchdown pass away from Cade Stover. Like you couldn't have possibly played a ball any better than he did there. I think he'll take some time covering Cade Stover. He'll take some time covering Emeka Egbuka. He'll blitz a time or 2 out of the slot position and put some stress on Ohio State's offensive tackles. So he feels to me like almost a key to Michigan's defense, only because he can do so many things. Like clearly the strength is the defensive tackles for Michigan, but the versatility of someone like Mike Sainristil, I think, is what allows Jesse Minter to get a little creative with like some of his fire zone pressures and stuff like that. So I think if Michigan's defense is able to keep Ohio State's offense in check, it'll be for 2 reasons. 1, the tackles controlling stuff, and 2, Mike Sainristil creating a little bit of havoc.
Really good corners in this game across the board, right? Will Johnson and Josh Wallace and Mike Sainristil at Michigan, and Davison Igbinosun and Denzel Burke and Jordan Hancock at Ohio State. You look at their coverage grades on PFF, they're all way up there in the Big Ten. But this guy's a playmaker.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't mean to sound like Gus there, but I mean, this, you can almost picture it in your head. I think he has 5 picks this year. Like, you can just picture like the interception in the middle of the third quarter. That's a huge momentum swing in a close game. Like, that's what this guy does. I almost picked Jordan Hancock on this list. He's not on this list for Ohio State. I think they're very similar.
Same guys,
in that regard. Yeah. Right. They'll play inside. I think they can both be physical. I think they both know how to make plays on the ball. And so I think it's very possible that we wind up with more defensive plays than offensive plays in this game. And if that's the case, then Mike Sainristil is going to be one of the guys making those plays. No doubt about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
8th is J.J. McCarthy. I took him here. I think we have to have both quarterbacks on this list. And it's just the J.J. McCarthy, the story of J.J. McCarthy and what he did last year, right? That you thought, okay, coming into that Ohio State game, are they going to ask him? Are they going to put it on him? You thought, okay, Michigan's going to come in and run the ball. And then Michigan came in and threw it with him. It started with, again, what I think is a great play by him in a 0-0 game, a 3rd down blitz. Jim Knowles, the Ohio State defensive coordinator, brings the house. J.J. McCarthy throws off his back foot. There's a missed tackle by Ohio State, and Cornelius is out the house for a touchdown. But it begins with J.J. McCarthy in the face of pressure, making the right read and a good throw and creating that. And then certainly the talk since then has been all the mistakes Ohio State made, giving up big plays. And Ohio State, that's been their whole focus this season. But J.J. McCarthy made them. He did make them. And then he took a step this year. It has not been as good the last couple weeks. Feels like sometimes Michigan didn't ask too much of him. But then also now in November, you're wondering, oh, is it just because they didn't ask him, or is he not capable of it? I don't know what we're going to get out of J.J. McCarthy in this game.
Neither do I. I mean, I've taken the last 2 weeks as maybe they don't trust him to put the game in his hands. He threw it 8 times.
Did you think the first 2 months they did?
Yes.
Or building to it?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, and I thought he took steps forward in the areas you wanted to see him do so coming into the season in terms of being a pocket passer and processor. But I thought against Maryland, he was really careless with the ball. This was like kind of a non-factor against Penn State, and they still won that game. And he looks to be injured. Like, I think his mobility has been impacted. I think he got like maybe rolled up on against Penn State, and then did not look particularly mobile against Maryland, and made some puzzling decisions in the run game. I don't think he's great with making reads if they give him the opportunity to do it. So I don't know. I think if Ohio State does really what it's not done all year, like play undisciplined, then certainly JJ is athletic enough to make some plays and make Ohio State pay for that. But I don't know that he's playing at that level right now. I actually think, like, for as many questions as there are about Kyle McCord in this spot, I think Kyle McCord has played better than JJ McCarthy has over the last month. So he's in an interesting spot. I think maybe we got a little too far over our skis with JJ through the first like 8-9 games. He
was like second in the Heisman odds.
Yeah.
At that point.
Yeah. And he's not there now. And I think that's the right read on it. I'm not envisioning a scenario where like he's the guy that goes out and wins this game for Michigan.
I think it's reasonable for the expectations for the quarterbacks in this game to be good, not great. They don't determine the game. But I think if there is a large gap in quarterback play, if one guy's great and one guy's bad, that's the game.
Yeah. Or which of the two can limit
errors?
Yeah. Which of the two can limit mistakes the most? Yeah.
Yeah. All right. JJ McCarthy was 8th. 9th, you took Tyleik Williams from Ohio State.
Yeah. I just wanted Ohio State's defensive line to be represented here. I think you could have taken either of the ends, JT Tuimoloau or Jack Sawyer, and maybe that would have been more appropriate given what we've said about Michigan's offensive tackles, because the interior of Michigan's offensive line, as I said earlier, is pretty good, and Zach Zinter might be the best guard in college football. But Ohio State needs to shut down Michigan's rushing attack in this game. Tyleik Williams is by far the biggest difference maker that Ohio State has on the interior of its defensive line, where it needs to be stout for 4 quarters in this game and not let Michigan just turn out the running game and hold the ball, because Michigan will gladly win a game 21-17 if it has to. But it's about the whole defensive line. Like I do think this defensive line is in a good place. It's in the best place it's been in this rivalry, probably since 2019, and probably even going back. Yeah, the 2019. Jack Sawyer's playing well. JTT has not been bad. He's maybe tapered off a little bit from some dominant play we saw midseason. I think Tyleek has been consistently very good all year, and if he's able to, I guess, negate the impact that like Zach Zinter and Drake Nugent can have in this game as a guard and a center, then I think that goes a long way in helping Ohio State win.
So we talked about the Michigan defensive tackles, right? Graham and Jenkins and Grant, but we don't know for sure about Ohio State defensive tackle Mike Hall. It feels like Ryan Day said after the Minnesota game that maybe he would be on track to play. Mike Hall, Tyleek Williams, Ty Hamilton. I'd take the Michigan threesome, but
yes,
pretty good also for Ohio State.
Yeah, pretty good. I think, and Ty Hamilton has played better of late too. And he's like he's a dirty work kind of guy. He's eating up double teams. He's not doing anything all that flashy, but he does important stuff for the rest of the line and the linebackers to free them up. I think maybe that's the biggest charge here with the interior of the defensive line is you can't let Ohio State's linebackers get covered up the way they got covered up a couple of times the last 2 years, especially in 2021. Like they were just getting steamrolled by Michigan's offensive line. The linebackers were. So if Ohio State's tackles can keep that from happening, then I think Ohio State stands a pretty good chance of limiting Michigan's rushing attack.
All right, and I took a Michigan defensive lineman as the last guy here. Michigan has 4 edge guys who have played between 330 and 230 snaps. They have all of them between 19 and 22 pressures. So I took Jalen Harrell, who has played the most, but he's kind of a stand-in for Michigan edge pressure, and that's a stand-in for the Ohio State tackles. And so when Penn State played Michigan, we saw Penn State blow up the Michigan right tackle situation to the point where Michigan kind of couldn't function in a passing game. When Ohio State played Penn State, I thought that might happen. Now, it turned out that Chop Robinson, who did that to Michigan, got hurt during the Ohio State game. And that was rather fortuitous for Ohio State and a very bad break for Penn State. But the Ohio State tackles, Josh Simmons and Josh Fryer, actually, I think, held up pretty decently well in the Penn State game.
Yep.
But you look at, for instance, the last play of the first half for Ohio State against Minnesota on Saturday. Josh Fryer gets beaten by a speed rush off the edge. Kyle McCord gets sacked. He gets his leg bent up under him in a weird way. And that's why Jalen Harrell's on this list, because I was more concerned about left tackle Josh Simmons coming into this year. But I feel like Josh Fryer, who was maybe pretty steady early in the season, has felt a little more vulnerable to some real edge pressure, especially some speed rushes. And that's why it's number 10 and not number 3. But I don't know. I think the Michigan edge guys led by Harrell have a chance to do something.
I think they do. It's not as dynamic as they were 2 years ago, but I think they're still pretty good there. And Josh Simmons and Josh Fryer, I think, have gone in opposite directions in terms of their trajectories this year. I think Simmons is, pretty strongly improved from where he was at the beginning of the year. He's actually been okay for them, better than I thought he would be. And Josh Fryer was stronger at the beginning of the year, not so much lately. Neither one of them has had games where they're just can routinely just getting their butts whipped. If Ohio State fans remember, Isaiah Prince against Penn State in 2016, I think that was, where he gave up 5 sacks in that game. But the thing that worries you, I think, is the 1 or 2 times per game where Josh Fryer seems to just get beat, in tremendously bad fashion. Kyle McCord's pocket presence / ball security has not been very good, and a strip sack in this game could be, the reason that Michigan wins a game here. So that's what would worry me. It's not so much down after down Michigan's defensive ends beating Ohio State's tackles. It's the one or 2 times that they do win clean and get that shot on Kyle McCord. Does the ball come out, and does Michigan take advantage of it?
All right, that's our top 10 most important players for the Ohio State-Michigan game. Number 1, Ohio State center Carson Hinsman. Number 2, Ohio State quarterback Kyle McCord. Number 3, Michigan offensive tackle Carson Barnhart. Number 4, Michigan tight end Colston Loveland. Number 5, Marvin Harrison Jr., the Ohio State receiver. Number 6, Ohio State safety Sonny Styles. Number 7, Mike Sainristil, the Michigan defensive back. Number 8, Michigan quarterback J.J. McCarthy. Number 9, Ohio State defensive tackle Tyleek Williams. And number 10, Michigan edge rusher Jalen Harrell. By the way, forgot to mention this earlier. 7 Northern games this weekend that have been played at least 100 times. So like that's some history. We got Minnesota, Wisconsin, 132, Oregon State, 126, Indiana, Purdue, 124, Ohio State, Michigan, 118. This is all coming into this weekend. Illinois-Northwestern, 116, Washington State, 114, and Iowa State, Kansas State, 106. History, baby.
We love ball up here.
Yeah.
Play for a century.
So we appreciate you guys making us part of your Northern football experience. Like, we'll be back next Monday to talk about conference championship games, what happened on this rivalry weekend. You can subscribe to our Kings of the North YouTube channel to make sure you get all of this content. And sometimes we give a little bonus Northern football stuff only in that Kings of the North YouTube channel. You also can certainly find us on the podcast channel and also that YouTube channel. But Kings of the North. Think of that. We have social media. We have an Instagram. We have a Facebook. We have a TikTok. We have Twitter. So KOTNCFB, Kings of the North College Football. Wherever you are on social media, go find us there. And again, we're just getting rolling here, Landis.
TikTok?
We'll figure it out. Yeah, we got it. We'll do dances. We're going to do dances. We'll do it. We're going to do dances on that social media.
Yeah.
So Ohio State, Michigan, and a bunch of other great games this weekend. A lot of these games affecting the playoff picture. For now, thanks to you guys so much for joining us. I'd like to say thanks to our producer, Mike Urostowski, who had to do all these graphics. Oh, so many games, so many graphics. We appreciate Mike making our show look great. For Bill Landis, I'm Doug Lesmerises. Enjoy rivalry week. And that was Kings of the North.